Great. Next up we have Dr. William Meikle. He's from Westaco, and he will be talking about small hive beetle populations. So, thank you. And we'll have the mic up as soon as...
Okay, well, I can talk loud. Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon. I'm here to talk about small hive beetles. As Mr. Jackson just pointed out, with respect to tracheomites, small hive beetles are an invasive pest, but it was a huge problem. It doesn't seem to be so much a problem now, probably because of the drought. So it's becoming less and less, well, I don't know if it's becoming less and less of an issue, but it isn't quite on the same magnitude as it was when it first arrived in terms of importance. But anyway, we're working on it so that we can understand more about the beetle and help solve problems the beetles might cause in the event it comes back or invades new areas. How do I make the slide go forward? Push the button?
The button on the right.
On the right. Right. Okay. This is a slide that I had last year. I talked about small hive beetle last year, mainly with respect to a lot of experiments we ran on the effects of diet and temperature on small hive beetle, and we found that small hive beetle actually are very agreeable insects to work with in the lab because they're easy and they're very easy to predict what they do. Temperature is a very strong factor. Eggs and I think eggs and pupae need at least 10 degrees centigrade, which is about 50 degrees or so Fahrenheit to survive. The larvae need a little bit more, and adults need about 70 degrees or so Fahrenheit to work well. I continued this. Now, instead of looking at beetle growth and development at different temperatures, I looked at how much food they ate, because I wanted to know, what the objective here is to sort of develop a computer model of the beetle population dynamics. And the model would be useful in helping us understand things that we see in the field. It helps us forecast small hive beetle outbreaks if we can link beetle dynamics to weather. And it helps us figure out which life stages might be the most susceptible to intervention, maybe eggs, larvae, pupae, whatever. That's
We're back on, I think.
There we go. Okay. And it helps us analyze the impact of different control strategies. If somebody comes up with a new trap or a new chemical, we can use a computer model to help us understand what the effect might be on the beetle population. And also, we can use such a model to understand the relationship of the beetles to bees. Obviously, beetles have a very intimate relationship with bees. They live in beehives. They eat bee food. They even eat, of course, brood. Bees, on the other hand, they remove beetle eggs and beetle larvae, so they become sort of a natural enemy of small hive beetle. But on the other hand, they also keep competitors and predators of small hive beetles out of the hive. So it's a curious thing. It's a tricky thing. So small hive beetles have they've achieved a way of living in which they give up some of those eggs and larvae in exchange for other food, availability of food, and protection from other things. So why not? Anyway, what I see here at the bottom is the worst enemy that a small hive beetle has at this point in time. It's probably a vigorously cleaning bee. That's probably the worst thing for it. So here's a nice shot of small hive beetles. So basically, one of the things I was looking at in this year was how much small hive beetles need to eat. Because what I want to do is, if we're going to develop this computer population model, we start by looking at just the small hive beetles themselves. How fast they grow, under what conditions, and how much they eat. And then we get this model, we can predict the populations in the absence of bees. Well, that's not very useful. So the next step would be to add bees to the equation. That's the tricky part, as I'll soon show you. Anyway, when it comes to what beetles eat, I realized this graph is probably too small. I didn't realize it was going to turn out quite like this. But we have those columns there, and on the y-axis on the bottom is temperature, and on the x-axis is the conversion rate of food to beetle. So it's the ratio at which they convert food to themselves. And for small hive beetles, you don't need to know all the details here. It's temperature related, but for the most part, their conversion ratio is very high. It's about between 0.4 and 0.5. So about 40 to 50% of what they eat, the mass, is converted right into beetle. That's really high. I mean, for a cow, it's probably less than 10%. It's certainly less than 10%. For predators, it's less than that. So they're pretty efficient, and insects in general are efficient with that sort of thing. So that's not too surprising, but anyway, so now we know. That can give us some numbers to hang population growth on. This is a graph that just shows the relationship of beetle numbers to beetle growth. And the y-axis in this case is the number of beetles that we put into a vial, the number of eggs. Okay? So as you increase the number of eggs, on the y-axis is how much the beetle larvae weigh. As you increase, and of course we kept the same amount of diet in each vial. So this is just increasing competition. And what it shows is that the beetles are very sensitive to competition. They're sensitive to competition, but if they don't have enough food, they just turn out to be small. So they can eat a lot, but if they don't get as much as they want, they can make do with a very small amount of food, and then they turn into little tiny dwarf beetles. So we're getting very small adults. Anyway, this is, so this is the number of eggs, and here's the number of, that's the weight of the beetles as the number of competitors increase. This one just shows, it's a very straightforward graph, how big the larvae were compared to how big the adults were. And it's very straightforward. What it basically shows is that the beetles lose about half their weight when they pupate. So if you get a 10 milligram larvae, you get a 5 milligram adult. And we were getting adults, a usual adult is going to weigh around 15 milligrams. Not too much different than a bee, actually. But we were getting adults as small as 2 milligrams if they got starved. But they would turn into an adult. So that means they have a very plastic natural history. They can make do on just about anything. They're like blowflies. They can get in there, colonize it, destroy it, eat it, and get out of there. Anyway, I decided to put some numbers on this. We did some studies last year, as I said, looking at oviposition rates, and if you've got 20 female beetles laying 50 eggs per day for 5 days, which is perfectly feasible, the resulting 5,000 larvae can eat a quarter pound of diet in the span of about a week. So they eat a lot. They'll turn into fat larvae, but they can finish it. If you had a lot more eggs than that, say you had more hive beetles, that quarter pound of diet could turn out as many as 8,000 adults. And they would be small, but they would be adults. So anyway, the whole point of all this study was to just try to link how much the beetles eat with how fast population grows, and it's all really clear from my background in quantitative ecology is very satisfying because it all works, clean numbers. So given their incredible potential for consumption and reproduction, it's really amazing that there are so few of them, actually. So what we can do now is we can, just taking the numbers that I presented last year about temperature and diet and the numbers this year and all, we could easily construct a model that would probably forecast very well beetle population growth in the absence of bees. In other words, if you just gave them like pollen padding to feed on. But that's useless. Nobody cares. What we want to know is how does their population grow in the presence of bees, not in the absence of bees. So that's the next step. And that actually is very tricky. Trickier than I thought. Maybe not trickier than you thought, but it was trickier than I thought. So first study was simple. We're just going to build a bunch of cages that hold a nuke. Each cage with a screen. I have a picture of it here in a minute. And we put in a frame of honey and pollen. Okay? And half of those cages we put bees, a package of bees. So we know there's few or no hive beetles in these packages. And in half of them, we don't put anything in the cage, we just put a lid on it so that no bees or anything can get in there. And so into each of those, into the beehive, the ones with bees and the ones without bees, we introduce 10 pairs of beetles just to see how their population grows and see how they affect the bees. The objective is, how do their populations grow with and without bees, if everything else is held the same? We also put 2 cages in the lab, and the same thing, with a frame of honey and pollen and with 10 beetles. And here's a picture of the cage. Nice cages, beautiful. Anyway, the experiment was complete flop. The ones in the lab One of them produced 700 larvae, and one of them produced 6,000 larvae. Well, that's a lot of variance for 2 samples. I regretted only having 2 samples, but we do have limits on workers and stuff. Besides, it's disgusting working with small hive beetles. I don't know if you've ever done it, but everything's disgusting. You can get some students to do it, but some of them just really don't want to do it. Now, the field experiment ended prematurely due to Hurricane Alex, but in the end, it didn't really matter. We found no small hive beetle larvae at all in the beehives where I'd introduced them. And in the cages in the field that I had the honey and pollen frames, but no bees. There were small hive beetle, but those were heavily attacked by ants. And so it was really hard to say, well, what's going on here? We found ants removing small ones and getting through the mesh. It was a very small mesh, but still. Anyway, big mess. So I thought, well, okay, this is too complicated. We've got pairs of beetles. We're expecting them to lay eggs. We're not controlling enough stuff here, so we're going to try controlling some more things. So we're going to run another experiment. Find another student, a new one. This time we got 12 frames of honey and pollen, same as last time. And we put them all in these little cloth sacks and put in 10 pairs of beetles. Male and females, 10 pairs. And beetles were all, by the way, of known age. So they were all young, so we knew that was not a problem. And we let them lay eggs for 48 hours. Then we take them out and take the adults out of all of the frames. 6 of the frames we put into a beehive. Because I want to see, now the bees are going to be presented with a frame full of eggs. I assume they're going to miss a few eggs, but we'll get some idea of how many they'll clean out. And then we take 6 of them and put them in the lab back in this cloth sack to see, that way we can measure how many eggs, on average, we expect would have been laid in the field. Of course, we can't count the ones that are on the frame because they're too small. There's eggs, and small hive beetles like to lay into crevices, and they can find all kinds of little places to lay eggs. So we could only guess about how many eggs were in on the frames that we put with the bees. And so then we just kept the ones in the lab in an incubator, and then we put the ones in the field into these beehives that had these small hive beetle traps. These were developed by Richard Arbogast. He's a researcher in Florida. And what they do is they just collect the wandering larvae that comes out of the hive. So this little plexiglass thing that fits on the bottom board at the entrance. And the larvae, the theory is the larvae go out and they fall into this little plastic receptacle. Well, it's just the bottom part of the trap there. So there it is. What could possibly go wrong? What happened was we got 1,100 larvae on average for the frames. So in 48 hours, we got 1,100 larvae with 10 pairs of beetles, which is, that's about what I would have expected. And then nothing on the ones we put in the beehives at all. Never saw a single larva. They were all cleaned off, completely gone. So this was a bad year for small hive beetle. Yeah, I felt bad about that, but I think that the problem there is that the bees were these healthy colonies, and they're presented with these frames, and so they just clean them all off. And maybe they didn't have a whole lot of cleaning to do other than that, but it's got cleaned off, and that was that. So now we've got a problem. I've run 2 experiments. I don't have any data at all. So we're going to run a 3rd experiment. Now this, you can't read it. I'm sorry about that. This is a scanned page from a book, and I got the PDF file, made I think a JPEG out of it, and somehow between the PDF and the JPEG it got really blurry. But we've got the top line. This is just in this book, The Honeybee. It just shows you this y-axis here is the percentage of time that a bee spends doing a given activity. The x-axis is the age of the bees in days, and it goes up to about 25 days. So I won't go through this whole thing, of course, but at the top, I think this one's resting. This is resting. So that's the amount of time. So if that's just like every one of these little gradations is 10%, they spend a lot of time resting, but that's not surprising. This next activity is patrolling. So they spend a fair amount of time patrolling, but that's just wandering around the frame, I guess. And this one is cleaning. So this is the time they spend cleaning. Well, that's what I'm interested in. And it looks like the first 4 or 5 days is when they do most of their cleaning. Of course, they're doing a little cleaning all, kind of all along. The bottom graph here, by the way, is foraging. So, of course, towards the end, there they are foraging away. So, this is what we're looking at. So I figured, okay, if they're going to be cleaning, they're going to be cleaning pretty much as nurse bees. So let's just get some nurse bees, put them in bee cages, these hoarding cages in the lab, and give them something to clean. And then we can figure out how much they clean. So what I did was prepared 4 cages of 30 nurse bees apiece. This is just an initial trial. In fact, they're still there. We're just doing this. So we got 120 nurse bees just emerged. Piece of comb, it's 1/10 of a frame, and there's nothing on the comb. So it's empty drawn comb. We dust it with a luminescent dye, this yellowy stuff. And I dust it very carefully, not to push the dye into the wax ready things, make it easy for them. And I figured I put 30 bees into each cage, which you will immediately say, well, that's not enough bees. You've got to have more bees than that, and you're absolutely right. But I figured for nurse bees, if you look at number of nurse bees you would expect on 1/10 of a frame, well, that would mean 300 nurse bees on a whole frame, and if you got 10 frames in a brood box, it'd be 3,000 nurse bees. That's probably not too far off from the population of nurse bees you would expect. Now, you don't have any of the other bees on it, but anyway, for nurse bees, it's probably not too far off. It's not a magnitude off. And then I was going to take photos of it over time. And then we determined, I just wanted to know how much does a bee clean on average. If I know how much a bee cleans, then I can figure out how much a small hive beetle lays its eggs. Maybe we can do something, try to figure out how small hive beetles distribute their eggs, and we can get some kind of relationship going to cleaning versus small hive beetle egg laying. You see? But there's our setup. There's the cage right there, these plexiglass cages. We've got a little thing of the comb in there, and these are some of these articulate lights that they have in the lab for looking at, illuminating stuff for a microscope. And there's a camera, and this is a heater because our lab is getting cold. So there it is, day 1. That's the first. Okay, there it is. So we put the bees in the cage. So there's some bees on this comb here. But see, the bee density is really low, but still, like I said, the math seems to indicate it's not too bad for nurse bee density. And I took a series of photos over time. I was expecting the dye to go away. And I'll be darned, it doesn't seem to have changed much over time. So it didn't, in the end, I couldn't really tell they'd done anything. Now, I don't know at this point, well, all I can say is that quantifying this cleaning behavior is going to be more difficult than I thought. I don't know if it's going to be worth the time and effort, but it's going to be difficult trying to figure this relationship out. I did take photos at the bottom of the cages because I found, one of the cages didn't seem to have so much dye on it as like this one. So maybe but all these bees came from the same brood comb. So this isn't not likely to be genetic differences, just differences. And we have to find some way of measuring how much they're cleaning. I guess what we do is put on a specific amount of dye and then measure how much if you can get that off. But that would be very difficult. So we're trying to figure out how to do it. And anyway, that's where we're at. So I'm afraid I was expecting to have something I could show you, and we could do the math, and that's it, but I don't. So the conclusion is that cleaning is not very thorough, at least not when they're in bee cages, and it's difficult to quantify. And that also the cleaning activity might be what we call an emergent behavior. That is something that comes out because the bees are in a beehive. So this is a behavior that you see then. And it's very difficult to transmit that to bee cages in a lab, where there's obviously a lot fewer bees, no queen, and that sort of thing. So we have to figure out a way to do it, probably with colonies, but we have to be able to quantify it very, very well. And so the conclusions are that small hive beetles eat a lot, grow fast, and they're anyway. They like blowflies, like I said. Generating a model of those is very easy. And quantifying the relationship is very difficult. And the objective here is, as I put it in that article for the newsletter is my objective would be to try to figure out what the tipping point is for the bee populations in hives that do have small hive beetle problems. For example, among queen rearers, when you're raising queens, they tend to, because of the way they do it, they might end up with bees that are not cleaning so much. Maybe there aren't very many nurse bees in there. They're getting old. So what I want to do is be able to develop some guidelines for making sure, ensuring that you have the right age distribution of bees in the hive to have for optimum cleaning efficiency. So anyway, that's what we'd like to do, but we haven't got there yet. And many thanks to Ruth and Roy and Clara, who had to do all the dirty work. Thank you very much.
Question.
Any questions? Yes.
This doesn't have much to do with bees cleaning up hive beetles, but do y'all have any data, or have you noticed that fire ants kill hive beetle larvae?
I am sure fire ants kill hive beetle larvae because they kill everything. They eat anything. The guy right there, Steve Cook, is a fire ant expert. And I'm sure they would eat them if they could get them. I think that small hive beetles have a lot of natural enemies once they leave the hive. I think that everybody sees that as a good point of intervention. The problem is if they've left the hive, that means they've already caused the damage that they're going to cause on the inside. I suspect that small hive beetles are going to be, I think we'll probably find a way of managing them without too much difficulty, but I think that once the small hive beetles leave the hive, they have all kinds of natural enemies. But yeah, that's a good point. Yes?
Do you use any type of attractant to catch the small hive beetles?
Use an attractant?
Yes.
Well, we haven't. We haven't tested any attractants. I'm trying to think. Of course, they do have these pheromones that are produced, at least some of the pheromones are produced by the yeast that they have introduced into the hive. So the yeast produces this chemical, and that draws the beetles. So attracting them is probably not a difficult thing. It's just what to do with them once you've got them.
Kill them.
Kill them. I suspect that in much of Texas, I mean, right now, they're just going to have a very hard time. But what I would like to do is use the model to understand if we manage to get it to a point where we can use it, what would happen if you removed X number of adults? Because obviously the adults aren't really the problem, it's the larvae. And what would happen if you could find some way of killing eggs? What would happen if you could find some way of tracking most of the larvae? So that would be, a use of the model, but I can't see, we haven't started using attractants yet. No. Any other questions? Yes?
Are those small dwarf hive beetles, are they viable?
That's a very good question. Below 6 milligrams, we never saw any eggs. But researchers, published research shows that this one group had 10 milligram adults, and they had eggs. They didn't have any problem at all. So I figured somewhere between 10 and 6. So I picked 8. Probably 8 milligrams is probably around where they stop laying eggs. So that's why I picked the 8,000 eggs in a quarter pound of diet will produce 8 milligram adults, if you do the math. So that's a very good question.
But your assumption is if you have a lot of young nurse bees, you have less money. They'll eat more.
That is an assumption. That is our assumption. Is that the nurse bees, based on this graph and general knowledge of the honeybees, nurse bees do a lot of the cleaning. So that was why I was focusing on nurse bees. But maybe we have to add, like I said, other levels of complexity to get something useful.
Strong hive with the constant temperature of 92 to 93 degrees Fahrenheit will keep hive beetles out of the brood nest.
Small hive beetles are going to have a very hard time if you've got a hive that's not too big. It's a bit like wax moth larvae. They can cause pretty bad problems, but it's kind of the same thing. If the bees can patrol it, if they're strong enough to patrol everywhere, they're not likely to have a problem. And the small hive beetles don't like brood temperature. They do well at 32 degrees, which is, I think, around 90 to 92 degrees Fahrenheit, but not much warmer than that. So if it's a hot Texas summer,
And dry.
yeah, they're going to have a hard time.
We had really good luck with
Yeah.
no hive beetles this year.
Okay, good. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, John G. We got John G back there.
Oh, sorry.
Your pygmy or your dwarf beetles produce dwarf offspring or?
You know, we didn't, we just measured their, what I suspect is this. We just measured oviposition on big adults. We didn't measure the oviposition on the smaller ones, like the 8 milligram ones. But I suspect that they could produce a fine larvae. I'm betting that they just turned out small because they didn't have enough food. That's all.